This may be the dumbest story idea I've ever had, but I think it turned out pretty fun in the end. Let me know what you think. This is also a one-shot and not connected to any other story or universe. On board the orbital station, peaceful. Garden, a hub of trade negotiations and ambassadorial talks throughout the Orion Octant of the galaxy, a special meeting of the Psychic Committee has been called. This subgroup of the larger alliance of sapient species deals in any matters that concern those races with abilities beyond the scope of the physical senses. The room is just one of hundreds of identical conference rooms aboard the station, used to facilitate the various talks and debates of the dozens of species in the alliance. An ovular table took up the center of the room, and around it were 15 modular chairs for each member of the committee. A robotic refreshment station, some potted, artificial plants, and technically impressive but bland artwork occupied the remaining space. At the appointed time, the committee members filed into the room and took their seats. As always, a brown insectoid Lorvin entered first. Despite being the weakest in terms of psychic power, their hive mind meant that any member of their species could fill in for any meeting, so there was always one of them nearby. Rilman, the tall, slender, silver-scaled ambassador of the Moonarans, was next. Her people's empathic abilities made them excellent mediators. Then came the diminutive Punchin ambassador, Audiobook. What his species lacked in size, they made up for in telekinetic power. The remaining members filed in one after the other and took their seats. The serving bot disengaged from its station and made the rounds, dispensing small drinks and snacks to each member until the final member and the one who called the special meeting entered the room. Ambassador Rihava was one of the Krinari people. They had to duck, curving the spine of their 6-foot-long snake-like body into an S shape as they entered to keep their spiral horns from hitting the soundproof door. Despite their larger size and fearsome fangs, they were a calm and peaceful people, with only average strength both physically and psychically. Their 2 sets of legs and arms were somewhat short and small for their size, and their abilities were focused on the perception of other beings' presence and intentions. Without looking, they could tell you how many people were in the room, how many of them were lying, and whether any of them had any kind of psychic ability. As Rihava took their seat at the head of the oval, they were currently sensing 15 beings in the room, besides themselves, all with psychic powers and none of whom were currently lying. They were instead some combination of bored, irritated, and curious. I'm sure you are all wondering why I called a special meeting that warranted the disruption of your usual schedules. As you may have guessed, it is related to the report I sent out earlier on humans, the newly arrived species. Everything in the report is accurate, but there is an addendum that must be delivered in person. They were somewhat frazzled as there had been multiple obnoxious reminders set for this meeting right up until the very minute before it began. Still, they cleared their throat and set down a rectangular object in front of them that appeared to be made of thin, flexible wafers bound with a simple spiral wire and bearing the large letters "Read at Meeting" on the front, drawing odd looks from several other committee members. They did their best to ignore them and opened the notebook to the first page. Now then, as stated in the report, I boarded the human ship, the SS Henson, to examine a baseline sample of humans as well as a few that claimed to have some special psychic talent. Psychic abilities are quite prevalent in human media, so we took each of these claims seriously. Unfortunately, my examination found no abilities in any of the humans, and you can read the full details in the official report. However, while aboard their vessel, I was sensing some sort of psychic resonance. It was inconsistent and difficult to pin down, so I asked for a tour of the vessel. The humans were happy to comply. They seemed to have a fondness for the Krinari, as we resemble a legendary creature from their ancient folklore. An eastern dragon, according to my guide. He showed me a few artistic renditions of the noble beasts, and I found the resemblance quite uncanny. They even have our mane and facial hair, they said as they idly brushed a hand through their flowing locks. A wash of irritation across the room prompted a quick cough from the ambassador. But where was I? Oh yes, the tour. They quickly flipped to the next page of the notebook. I was able to prompt my guide towards where the presence was strongest, and we eventually came to a machine shop in the engineering department occupied by an elderly human and one of their dog animal companions. At first I thought the dog, named Sprocket, may have been the source of the resonance, but other than an above-average empathy for an animal, there was nothing to report. Instead, my senses drew me to a large cabinet in the corner of the room. A slight draft was coming from that area, and with some assistance from my guide, we moved it aside and found an open air vent behind it. The closer we looked, the stranger it appeared, as the other side of the vent looked to be a natural stone tunnel. My guide even checked the schematics of the ship and found no such ventilation duct in that location. The curiosity in the room had increased. Even the serving bot seemed to have stopped its tasks, though that was likely due to it being serviced by a small yellow and white furred being, whose species the ambassador couldn't quite remember. After some deliberation, I decided to enter the tunnel, it being just large enough to accommodate my size. After a few twists and turns, Rehava flipped to the next page and furrowed their brow in confusion as they read next passage. Large letters at the top of the page in their own handwriting simply read, "Please continue." My apologies, fellow members. I know I read my own report several times before this meeting, but I do not recall this passage. They proceeded somewhat hesitantly. The tunnel opened out into a large natural cave complete with rock formations and pools of water that stood in stark contrast to the ventilation ducts, pipes, wiring, and plasma conduits that crossed the space. This room was the source of the resonance and contained a multitude of psychic beings. The exact number of them I was sensing fluctuated wildly, causing me to become quite disoriented. Upon noticing my arrival, the residents screamed and fled in every direction, their panic only exacerbating my condition. As they read the passage, Rehava recalled having some kind of episode upon the ship, but could not remember any details. Once most of them had disappeared into various ducts and passages in the walls, I was approached by a single being, seemingly sensing my distress. Thankfully, they spoke the same language as the humans and even had a working external translator. They introduced themselves as Gobo and asked if I was one of the new friends of the silly creatures, which is apparently their name for humanity. After some back and forth, I learned that they were called Fraggles and had lived among the silly creatures, or humans, for as long as any of them could remember. Their psychic abilities appear to be the polar opposite of my own. Instead of sensing others, they erase their own presence from those around them. Even photos of them will be ignored or outright deleted, and video feeds tend to glitch when they are in view. I even discovered that my own notes on the encounter that I had taken on my data slate were blank after I briefly looked away from them. Whether this is due to my mind being manipulated, or if their abilities affect the device itself, is unknown. Gobo did have a solution, an archaic paper notebook and pen they had borrowed from the humans. The ambassador nodded, adjusting, said item in their hands. They borrow many things from the humans, who either do not notice that they have disappeared or believe that they have lost or misplaced them. This is not entirely a one-sided relationship, though. The Fraggles are avid tinkerers who often fix or improve devices that they find. I found their level of knowledge of the technology on board difficult to ascertain, however, as they did not use any of the standard terms that the humans used. The example Gobo provided was that he fixed the fluxer by connecting the hosit to the thingamajig and bypassing the zonker. I still have no idea what system on their ship this is referring to. Are there any questions? So far? The Lorvan stood and raised its appendage. Yes, my people have received and viewed full documentation of all life on the humans' homeworld and colonies. Through the hive mind, we know of all their plants and animals, and I have never heard of those. Yes. Well, it may be that this ability of theirs is more powerful than it seems. The ambassador was slightly distracted by an odd beep from the serving bot, as the being repairing it shoved some loose wires and screws inside, as well as what appeared to be an open package of salted nuts. They then closed the access panel with a slight crunch and gave it a firm strike with their fist. The bot returned to its tasks at a faster pace than before, though it did run into the wall a few times, and presented Rehava with a lovely cup of the human's green tea, despite them not recalling ordering anything. Still, they took a drink for their parched throat as Adoval, the Punchin ambassador, spoke up. And what do these beings look like? Are they recognizable from their human counterparts? Rehava flipped through the notebook, going back over the same page a few times before finding a passage labeled Physical Description. Ah, here we go. According to my notes, the Fraggles all are furry, and their size is in between. They come in many colors: yellow, pink, red, blue, and green. It seems that even recording them in this method is somewhat difficult. Rilman, the Minarin ambassador, raised a silver-scaled hand. Are these creatures dangerous? Were you able to determine their intentions? the flipping of more pages followed as the flustered Rehava searched the document. Let's see. Aside from the occasional tinkering and borrowing of various items, they fill their days with games, music, and other such frivolities. That, combined with their skittish nature and general reluctance to leave their habitat, means that they will neither be terribly useful nor a significant threat to the Alliance. However, the ambassador traced a finger under each word as they went, their brow rising in surprise. One of them has expressed interest in our group and has agreed to attend today's meeting? Ah, yes, I believe that would be my cue. A tan hat and a tuft of white fur was all that Rehava could see bobbing along past the committee members. It stopped at a gap between two members, and a small pair of yellow furred hands gripped the edge of the table. A large nose appeared, shortly after, accompanied by a strained grunt, before disappearing below the edge again. The small creature tried to climb the table a few times before Audible rolled his eyes and levitated them onto the tabletop by their white tufted tail. It landed rather unceremoniously on its face and quickly picked itself up with a shake. Surprisingly, they did not seem offended and gave the Poochin ambassador a respectful nod before turning to face the assembled psychic committee. As I'm sure you have forgotten, it said with a flourish of its hat, I am the Fraggle that they call Uncle Traveling Matt. I have journeyed out from Fraggle Rock, the place that we call home, to discover and explore the amazing great unknown. I've already seen every corner of the earth, from countryside to city in Hong Kong, New York, and Perth. He paced back and forth along the table as he went, meeting the confused and astounded gazes of each member as he went. And so we came with our friends to this brand new place to explore beyond the rock in the depths of outer space. All I ask of you is permission to explore. And if it's not too much trouble, then perhaps just one thing more. As I record and document all of the things I find, I would like to send a record to the Fraggles left behind. That would be simple to arrange, Rehava replied. A diplomatic visitor's pass will allow you access to all public places on the station, and a guest account on the ship's interstellar communication system will allow you to send messages back to your ship, assuming you have the correct access code. I will send a message to my aide now to prepare them as physical copies for you. That would be most wonderful. My nephew will be pleased. And with that, I hope you don't mind if I take my leave. The stares of so many can feel a bit bizarre, even with an audience as kind as you all are. With that, the Fraggle hopped down from the table and calmly exited the room, the eyes of every member following the yellow-furred being in the odd hat, until the door finally closed behind him. An awkward and confused pause followed as the committee members regarded each other. I believe that is meeting adjourned, unless there are any further questions, Rehava stated awkwardly. A few members seemed about to say something before reconsidering. They turned to address the Lorvin in the room. Can you please send the minutes to the group as soon as you are able? The insect simply nodded in reply. A rather unorthodox meeting, Adovel said as the other members rose to leave. Hopefully some evidence of this tale of yours comes forward soon. We should have the Lorvins keep an eye out for their representative. Since he was unable to arrive on time, they may be lost somewhere on the station, though it will be hard to find them without a more accurate physical description. Yes. Most unfortunate, Rehava replied as they stood and gathered the notebook from the table. I do hope to meet them one day. Fraggle Rock and all of its characters are the intellectual property of the Jim Henson Company. Now enjoy next amazing story. Good morning, class. Today we have a special guest lecturer from the Human Engineering Academy. As you know, their fighter craft have been all the buzz since they joined the greater galactic community, and they have been gracious enough to come and share some of the particulars and peculiarities behind their design process. Mr. Tanner, if you please. Thank you, Professor. It is my pleasure to present some of the history that led to our unique designs. Even among ourselves, the approach is known to be a bit unorthodox. How we got there is a long series of problems and solutions, what we would call a domino effect, some from seemingly unrelated fields that culminated in what you see today. Now, we could start all the way back at humanity's very first attempts at flight, or at our first space program. But for the sake of brevity, we will start a bit farther forward in our entertainment industry. Yes, that's right, entertainment. Like many other species, our media comes in a variety of forms: literature, music, movies, and of course, interactive entertainment, what we call video games. As this last field developed, we strived for greater and greater realism in the worlds and actions depicted on screen. Eventually, we wanted to immerse ourselves more fully in these worlds we built, using virtual reality. But early virtual reality had many drawbacks, such as nausea and vertigo from the disconnect of the senses. This partial immersion would never be good enough, and we strove to achieve what we called full dive VR. This term refers to the full immersion of all senses, essentially hijacking the mind to place it into a virtual world while the body rests unaffected and safe in the real world. Entire genres of fiction were written based around the idea of such a thing a full century before we were able to achieve it, but achieve it we did. Hundreds of neuroscientists and computer engineers dedicated their entire careers to better interacting with the human brain and understanding its electrical impulses. Once the first full dive headset was ready, we found that the reality of, well, virtual reality was still disappointing. Even with the full immersion of senses and years of development by thousands of dedicated game developers, no world was quite good enough. No matter how high the resolution or how many senses were stimulated, the virtual worlds always felt wrong. The simple act of walking through a field while a cool wind blows was incredibly complex. Nausea was still an issue if the movements weren't exactly right. The feel of the wind on your skin was never quite real, and making every object in the environment react as your brain knew it should required an enormous amount of programming and processing power. It turns out it's nearly impossible to program all of the laws of the universe into a single program. And if any of them are missing, we can tell, either consciously or subconsciously. That uncanny valley is simply too steep to climb. But we did find another way. Instead of building a virtual world, we placed the player back into the real one. Of course, this defeated much of the original purpose. You couldn't sling magic or fight monsters like people wanted, though the Rock'em Sock'em Robot Boxing League was popular for a while. Some practical uses were also found, such as remotely piloting drones for dangerous tasks and tours of our more popular museums, but ultimately it remained a niche technology, at least until about half a century later, during the First Solar War. Our problem here was the sheer scale of the battles being fought. Millions of vessels and fighters scattered across the vastness of space in all three dimensions. It was an overwhelming amount of information to process, and even our most experienced pilots were dying without even knowing what hit them. The solution to this was the Threat Assessment System, a sophisticated virtual intelligence that could parse all of the information from a ship's sensor array and provide a usable HUD for the pilot to identify and warn them of incoming fire. I'm sure that all of you have something similar on board the ships of your own species, but this was the start for us. The problem with our TAS system was that even with the information in front of them, the attacks were happening too fast and changing too rapidly for them to react in time. They knew why they were going to die, but still couldn't avoid it. If only humans could think and respond faster. That's where those old full-dive VR worlds come back in. When you have full access to the brain, you get to test some of its more esoteric features. One experience that many people report having in stressful situations is time dilation, where time seems to move slower from their perspective. People have reported complex thought processes behind split-second decisions, and being able to recall extremely small details that should have been impossible to notice. By stimulating the adrenaline receptors and information processing sectors of the brain, we were able to trigger this response and essentially overclock our brains at will when hooked into the full dive system. There were limits and drawbacks to this. Too much of a boost would induce a seizure, and too frequently could cause lasting degradation to the brain tissue. So we established the rule of 30. A 30% boost in brain processing speed for less than 30 minutes a day was deemed to be the limit we could safely endure. This boost was enough to allow our pilots to react and dodge incoming fire. Of course, now they were in a virtual cockpit while sitting inside of the real cockpit. The lag of piloting remotely would have made the whole process pointless, and we began to think of further improvements. How could we improve the reaction? Time even more without endangering the pilots? How could we reduce the years of training required to become a pilot? Since our brain is directly connected to the ship, why are we flipping virtual switches and using a digital joystick? Why not have the pilot's innate instincts and nerve connections translate directly to ship movement? Well, translating. Those nerve connections and movements proved difficult, both in the programming and the training. After all, the fighter craft isn't a direct analog to the human body. But then, what if it was? Now that we are in space, things like aerodynamics don't really matter anymore. So what if we completely redesigned the craft with the full dive system and nerve connections in mind? Could we make it a smooth transition from real body to spacecraft? And so, the first maximum efficiency combat hub was built. It wasn't perfect, but with the ease of use, our test pilots were able to fly circles, and I mean literally fly circles, around their old fighter craft with only a few weeks of training and practice. These mechs were essential to winning. The first solar war, and they have only been improved in the time since. Hydraulics and servos were replaced with tension cables to better mimic human muscles. The cockpit was replaced with a gyroscopic pod that would react and reduce G-forces from any angle. And a lot more that's too classified to share here. So, that's where we are today. Any questions? Oh boy, that's a lot of questions. Let's start with you in the front with the blue scales. You said the MX were designed specifically for space combat. Can they go in atmosphere at all? Great question. The answer is yes, but actually no. The friction of entering the atmosphere is too much for most models, so they have to use a transport craft. Even then, the only ones on record that have done so are stripped-down display models. They can still move and fly, but they have to take it slow and be equipped with special shoes that use anti-grav panels to reduce their weight. Next question, you in the third row with the green shirt. What is the point of the paint and, I guess you would call them accessories, on some models? You said aerodynamics don't matter, but some of them seem to have a lot of impractical add-ons. Ah yes. You remember how I said we had media based on the full dive concept before it was fully developed? Well, media based on giant bipedal robots predates even those stories. Many of the pilots are fans of that media, regardless of how old it is, and like to decorate their units to match the depictions from those stories. Next, you in the back with the horn. How anatomically correct are the mechs? Do they have genita? I think that's all we have time for. Sorry. Class dismissed. Enjoy next amazing story. Good afternoon, class, and welcome to today's lecture. I am glad to see so many of you here today. There are many new faces and new species this semester, some of which will become subjects of deeper analysis in some of our lessons. This is not for the purpose of playing favorites, but more to study either quintessential examples of one of the many principles we will be studying, or one of the outliers that defies normal convention. Now, with the introduction taken care of, let's begin our first lesson, categorizing sapient species. There have been many attempts throughout history to categorize the species of the greater galactic community through various methods and criteria. One of the first such attempts was to organize them by biological taxonomy. This method was ultimately a failure, primarily because it produced no actionable information. Reducing species to the class of animal from which they evolved was not an indicator of how closely they could work together, or how well their societies would blend. Birds of a feather do not, in fact, flock together. Even dividing by broader categories, such as diet, fails to find the common ground and solidarity. That one would expect. So what is the correct criteria? We will go over some of the other more popular methods throughout history and their flaws in later lessons, but the current frontrunner among the community is to sort each species by way of a few simple questions. The first of which is, why? Did you come here? Almost every species assumes that the answer is the same for everyone when they first arrive, and they are often shocked at the breadth of answers. Of course, there's no one single drive for any species. It's often a mix of many factors. But when asked, there is always one that immediately springs to mind and stands out above the rest. Expansion is perhaps the most common one, or at least a significant factor. As societies prosper, populations and expected lifespans both increase until they strain the available resources. Eventually, the idea of settling new, untouched worlds burns brighter and brighter, cementing itself into the focus for scientific advancement. And once you expand once, it becomes easier to do so again and again, until you find a world that is already populated and discover you are not so alone in the universe. Conquest is often confused for expansion at first. The difference becomes clear, however, once another sapient society is encountered. Do they greet their new neighbors with open arms or openly armed? Are they willing to live side by side with these new people, or do they dominate and demand? Their subjugation? Sometimes it is even a religious imperative, their beliefs demanding they be spread and applied to all beings. These species are often the most troublesome to reason and negotiate with, faith being notoriously inflexible. Acquisition is also a common factor alongside expansion. In these cases, they seek not to settle new worlds, but to strip them bare of that which the society deems most valuable. Unlike conquest, species driven in such a way are often the easiest to negotiate with. Whatever they desire can often be traded for amicably, or they can be redirected to other available sources. Naturally, the greatest problem with these types of societies is that they are never satisfied, always wanting more. Survival is always a sobering answer to receive. Occasionally, a species on the brink of space travel will make that final leap in order to narrowly escape an extinction event. Such cases are a somber reminder of how lucky we all are to have made it this far. There are countless catastrophes that could have befallen any of us at any point in our evolution, and there's no telling how many potential sapient species have been lost to the galaxy's great survival lottery. Technological advancement is the primary focus of several societies. They seek a greater understanding of the scientific laws of the universe and how to bend them to their will. Collaboration with other like-minded species can accelerate such endeavors exponentially. One of the most notable results of these mutual alliances is the birth of the first hyperdrive. Knowledge of many diverse types has also been noted. These include philosophical truth, the true origins of existence, and in at least 4 cases, the search for the god of their religion. These last ones tend to be very single-minded, and one of them even completely disappeared from the greater galactic community without joining as they simply continued on their search. For several centuries, these were the primary answers by which each species was categorized. We did not receive a new answer until just recently. As you may have guessed, this new answer came courtesy of the newly integrated human species. When asked, they answered immediately and without hesitation, with one single word: curiosity. At first, we assumed it was a minor translation error. Surely they seek some specific knowledge like many others, but after some clarification, they confirmed that this was not the case. They do seek knowledge, of course, both technological and philosophical. But never before have we seen a species as equally obsessed with the small, frivolous details as they are with the grand questions. Unsatisfied with planetary scans, they often land on uninhabitable worlds, just to see what's there. They log every plant, animal, and bug on every world they find, even if they have no interest in settling it. And they have been observed spending hours absorbing seemingly random information without direction or purpose, a condition they call falling down the rabbit hole. What is truly most odd about this drive is that it extends to their fellow sapients as well. It can be observed here in this university, where previously species-exclusive courses regarding aspects of individual, history, and culture now all include at least a few human students. It is also the cause of the recent boom in our own field of study that I mentioned earlier. What was once a niche field considered frivolous by many, especially those setting the university budget, has recently been acknowledged for the potential that we have all known it to have. An untapped vein of collaboration and understanding with infinite potential and value. But I digress. After all, this change has not been without consequence. The human drive for exploration is so strong among them that they often disregard their own safety. This has resulted in multiple cases of human corpses needing to be extracted from inhospitable worlds they were told not to explore. In their forays with other cultures, several humans have died from alien foods that turned out to be dangerous, either on their own or when combined with unexpected ingredients. Fights have broken out due to misunderstandings, and war was even threatened by one species when humans began using their sacred instruments to play jazz music. With such recklessness, one wonders how they managed to evolve so far without killing themselves, but as with many other species, they don't see how else it could be done. Despite the risks, the impact they have had on the galaxy has been enormous for the short time that they have been among us. Indeed, human fusion has become a trend in just about every aspect of galactic life. Food, art, and non-religiously significant music previously exclusive to a single race now have humans both mastering the originals and taking them in wildly unexpected directions. The service industry is in such upheaval with exciting new restaurants that many centuries-old venues are struggling to stay open. Several liquors from different planets are now extremely rare commodities due to their inclusion in a new cocktail, called a pan-galactic gargle blaster, in reference to some old human literature that is popular among every alcohol-drinking species. We are about out of time for today, so I will leave it here for now. Your assignment before the next class is to write a brief summary of your answer to the first question. Feel free to answer at a personal, national, or species level. Just specify how you are answering and detail how your answer will affect your relationship with others based on their answer. Thank you, everyone, and as the humans say, peace out. This is more of a thought experiment to flesh out creating a new alien species than a story, but I found it more interesting as I went, so hopefully you will too. Feel free to post your own answers to the first question in the comments, or what you think the other questions would be. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.